Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Today we are going to be talking about spirit guides. Yay! It's going to be an updated video. I have an older video on this, but I really wanted to make a new one, a fresh one that has a little bit more information than the last time I talked about spirit guides, especially now that I have even more years under my belt working with spirit guides and working with other people's spirit guides. So, if you are new here, welcome. My name is Lauren. I'm a psychic, I'm a medium, and I'm also a psychic development coach. So I teach people how to develop their psychic abilities. And part of that is talking to your spirit guides. So if you like that kind of stuff, feel free to subscribe. I've got all sorts of tips and tricks around psychic development here on my channel. So let's get into talking about spirit guides. First, like, what the heck are they even? I think when you jump into the metaphysical community, it's like one of the first things that you hear about. And I feel like that's like usually the first question you ask of a psychic if you're getting a reading. You're like, who are my spirit guides? And I will say I have a follow-up to this in podcast form. And it's kind of more about like why I think we have a difficult time connecting with spirit guides. It's a little bit more like philosophical and going into like religion and all of that. So I would watch that or listen to that as like a follow-up to this video, and I'll link that down below. But ultimately, spirit guides, I couldn't tell you where the term came from, mostly because I didn't remember to look it up, but I know that, a lot of this stuff came out of the spiritualist movement when like seances and tarot cards and all of this stuff really became popular before like the church shut it down and it became like very stigmatized. But essentially a spirit guide is somebody on the other side, somebody that is a spiritual entity that is here to help you and guide you through this life. And there's a lot of different hierarchies and types of spirit guides, and I'll get into those in a moment. But ultimately, what you should know is that these beings are supposed to be of your highest and best good. They're only going to give you positive, helpful, loving information. They're not here to like lie to you or like push you in the wrong direction. And spirit guides can even be like religious figures that you've already known and worked with. It does not exclude, in my opinion, it doesn't exclude like saints, angels, like things from other religions. I really see it as an all-encompassing term for basically who is your spiritual team on the other side helping you live this human experience. And I think everyone has a spiritual team, and it's made up of lots or maybe a few different types of spirit guides. And they are here ultimately to help you and others navigate through this craziness that we call life. Ultimately, they have the utmost love for us, and they honor our free will. They let us make choices. They don't tell us what to do. If you find something telling you what to do, like in a negative way, probably not a spirit guide. They are the bridge between you and the spirit world. They really help with your intuition, understanding maybe larger things at play, the future, the past, what you need right now in order for you to live a happier and healthier life. And spirit guides can either be found on your own, or somebody like a psychic or a medium could potentially introduce them to you. So there's not like a wrong way of discovering them, which is often like a question that I get. You can feel really drawn to a certain guide. Maybe you've been drawn to one your whole life, but you don't need permission to work with that guide, and we'll get into that next. So let's talk about the hierarchy. There are some folks out there who have a very serious list and hierarchy of how the guides work and who's on top of who and what type of power they have. Ultimately, I would say take those with a grain of salt, trust your own intuition. Ultimately, that just has not resonated with me. I think there are different guides for different people, and I feel like there's no sense of hierarchy on that side. I do feel like there are beings that are more enlightened and more guide-like, like higher vibrational is like the only way I know how to describe it, but that doesn't mean that like another guide is lesser than, if that makes sense. So some of the types of guides you will hear about are angels, ascended masters. You could even have human spirits, people that you knew in this life, or maybe you don't even know, like maybe it was like a celebrity or something, or somebody well known, like a public figure that used to be a human. They could be your guide now. Spirit animals is another type of guide that's out there, really associated with like shamanism. I don't think spirit totems are the correct word. I don't encourage using that. They could just be called like literal just a spirit guide, and their name is Jeff. Like it doesn't have to fit into any of these categories, but you could also have mythical creatures as your guides. You could have like plants, you could see gnomes, you could see mermaids. A lot of my guides tend to fall into that category just because that resonated with me and my upbringing as a child. They could also look like gods or goddesses from different cultures, different pantheons. So like the Greek gods could be some of your like guides. You could have, again, like saints, angels from the Christian religion, you know, as guides. You could have Archangel Michael as one of your guides. You could have Jesus as one of your guides. I fully believe that that is an entity in himself. You could also have fictional characters as guides. And I have one guide that is a fictional character that I felt like I was crazy for the longest time because I was seeing it this way. But one thing I want to explain about guides is that they are not bound to these vessels like we are. They are just energy. So they can present themselves as anything they want to be. And in my opinion, I think they find whatever resonates with us most. That way, it's easier for us to connect with them. So if they want to look like a fictional character because that's going to get our attention the most, I think they do that. And I do think that they have their own unique personalities. So like if I'm reading somebody over here and they have a horse guide, I could read somebody over here on another day and she could have a horse guide as well, but it could look totally different, feel totally different, have a totally different personality and a purpose to help that person out. I do believe that guides are like temporary or permanent. I've had some guides just come in to help with like a very specific event or like trauma or something. And then I've also had guides that have been with me since day one, since I started tuning into them. But then I think there's also guides that kind of just like pop in and pop out, like whenever their talents or their, you know, expertise is of most use. I think sometimes they pick us, and I think other times we can pick them. Again, you can ask a guide if you can work with them. You can even just say, hey, I want to work with you, and you can see what response you get back. I think I used to wait around for permission to talk to like a certain being because I really, really wanted to talk to the fairies or something, and then I'd wait and wait and wait, and they would never show up. You are allowed to ask for their help. You don't have to wait for somebody else to tell you that it's one of your guides. For it to be your guide, you can just ask them to guide you. I do think that some guides also like work with you before you even get into this physical plane. Like I do think that sometimes you meet up with like family members, guides, and you're like, all right, this is the plan for this life, and I want you to come in and help me with this and give me guidance on this, and I want to go through these challenges, and I want you to be my guide. And so I do think some of them will have such a familiarity, like you've worked with them your whole life is what it will feel like. And I also think that they don't experience time the same way we do. I think that they are always available. They're not too busy to deal with us. I think they can work with multiple people at once. I think that that is a very like linear human way of thinking, is to think that, oh, they're too busy helping other people, I can't call on them. I don't think that's the truth. So those are kind of like my basic facts that I would kind of categorize as like, this is what a spirit guide is, and what they do and what they don't do. I really feel like they also are usually here to help us, not so much with like a very specific theme or purpose. I do feel like some guides are really here to help you. Like I had one guide that came in for a very short amount of time. It was a power animal, a spirit animal that really was here to help me get my work ethic up and fixed. And as soon as I did that, he kind of disappeared. And again, that was a very like specific thing that he worked on. However, one of my main guides that I've had from like day one, she helps me with anything, like any issue that I've got going on in life, she will be there to give advice on. And she's Ellen of the Ways, by the way, and I see her actually as, I just realized this was not planned, but I got that from Target ages and ages ago, and because it represented her, I saw her her with antlers. I know, which is kind of weird, but not weird, because if you look at Ellen of the Ways and the history and the lore behind her, which I found out years later, she actually is a woman, a goddess with horns, and she changes between female form and this like deer with antlers form as a female. So anyways, trying to think of more examples of like some of mine. I also have like a mythical creature guide that is a male, and he first showed himself as like, oh, I can't remember what they're called, but they're like half man, half goat. But he's also changed how he looks. Like for a while there, he looked like a fox in a like doctor's outfit. And I know that's weird, but I'm sharing it because I want you to know there's no wrong way to experience this. It can be very unique. I've also had mermaids as guides for a couple years. I feel like they kind of drifted off when I didn't need them as much. Who else are my guides? Again, the fictional character. I'm still kind of embarrassed to share that one out loud. I've also connected with celebrities that have passed. It was one in particular that I felt always very drawn to. Like, I felt like this person, even as a child, was like my grandfather. And I've always connected to his energy. And for a while there, I consulted him around like the creative side of my business. Because he was a very like entrepreneurial person and creative. Who else has been my guides? One of my guides now actually is, and I call him guide loosely because I don't think he's like fully like taken on guide duties. He's more here maybe to help with like family stuff, and that's my grandfather. My cousin comes in to help me with readings. I wouldn't call him a guide yet because I think he's still working through his own stuff, and I think that he's healing, and I don't know if he even wants to be a guide, but he is guide-like because he is helping me, he is guiding me, he is helping me from that other side. So again, I think spirit guide, even that term can be very like on a spectrum, if that makes sense. I know last year specifically, I purposely worked with the fairies for a little bit because I wanted to. And I invited them into my home with my Sabbath series, if you watched that, and sort of like invited them in for a short while to work with them. I've also called angels into my home and found that I didn't quite resonate with them as much, mostly because I have a lot of like religious stuff that still needs to be worked through. But I do still use Archangel Michael to this day to help me with like negative energy. I will always call him in because I feel like he's got big, muscular, protective man energy, which apparently makes me feel safe. And I really enjoy working with him in regards to like protection and boundaries. Overall though, when I look back at notes from guides that I met back in my Aspen program days when I first started studying, some of those I haven't heard from in a long time, and sometimes I'll meet new ones to this day. So just know that they change over time, and that's okay. And they change how they look sometimes. Or, you know, you can ask them to also change how they look if they just don't like resonate with you. More recently, I've also been studying a lot of the more witchy stuff, and I think that I've also discovered guides in that realm that I've never even have heard of. And I mean, that also begs the question, okay, like how much do you need to know the context of them to understand who they are? But I do think that, you know, as I discovered more of my likes and dislikes around the like witchcraft community, I've also been introduced to some of those guides, and they call them deities, and correct me if I'm wrong for anybody out there that practices, but it seems like they're pretty similar to spirit guides. Your deities, your spirit guides, it's basically your spirit team is what I like to say to kind of make it all encompassing. And who is out there trying to help you. So again, one of my guides more recently is Morgan, and she's kind of like my dipping my toe into that realm, and I just think I wasn't ready to like chat with some of those like scarier guides. They look scarier on the outside, but they still have those full intentions of like love and you know, your free will and your well-being at like their most highest importance. So I also wanted to make a note on names because that is something that I see a lot of people get hung up on, is feeling like you need to know the names of your guides. before you can like connect with them. And so like when people ask me this question, sometimes like the guide will literally be snarky and just be like, just call me like Jeff, just call me Bob, like it doesn't matter to me, like it. And one of my mentors always said personality and knowing who that guide is and what they're about is way more important than a name. And so for example, the deer guide that I talked about, for the longest time, I just called her my deer guide. And I just saw her as the form of a deer. It was like she was always white and glowing. I never saw any like features. She also didn't like speak to me. It was just like this like knowing, like I'd ask her a question and then I'd just know the answer. Whereas sometimes other guides I would talk with, like I'd feel like I could hear them and I could see them speaking. But then literally years later, and this had to have been like 2 years ago, so like 5-6 years after working with this guide, I found out that there's this guide over here, a woman, and she has this form and she can go between the two. And I was like, oh my gosh, you have a name. And she's like, yeah. And I was like, this is the same person. Like I did the checks of like, is this the same? Are you the same as this energy that I'm looking up? And she's like, yep, that's me. And so I didn't know her name for the longest of times. And sometimes I still just call her my deer guide. Sometimes I call her Ellen of the Ways. But that's just like a fun little story that I like to share, that you don't need to know their names. If you know their personalities, if you know kind of like what they're here to help with, like I don't think you need to know their names. Like you'll feel the difference between the guides. You'll feel their personalities. You'll feel in the way that they talk to you, their different like kind of energy. And sometimes I've had guides be like, I don't have a name and you can just give one to me. Other times they are very specific, like Aphrodite. Whenever I connect to her, she is very particular about what you do and how you do it, and what her name is and how you like should work with her. Now, I would say though that anyone else has worked with Aphrodite might not have had that similar experience. They are different for each of us, and I'll get into like the language and how we speak with them and how we work with them in a moment. But first, a common question: how do you know that you are actually connecting to a spirit guide? There's a lot of checks that you can do. One of those is that you know that they're a spirit guide if the information that's coming through is positive. If they're being negative, not a spirit guide, not something you want to be connecting to. The information has to be useful or helpful in some sort of way. I also believe that if you set the intention that this is my spirit guide, or I'm connecting to someone only for my highest and best good, they will probably within that intention be able to like talk to you or not talk to you. So that's an easy way of being like, hey, if you are my spirit guide, if you are of my highest and best good, you can talk to me. And then if you feel like they're still talking to you, maybe that they are indeed your spirit guide, you can always also just ask them, say, are you my spirit guide? And try to get like a yes or a no or some sort of confirmation. You can even tell them like, give me some signs over the next week, over the next day that you are my spirit guide. Again, they will honor your free will, so they're not going to come in and tell you what to do. Often if you're getting anything that's like telling you what to do, I feel like they're maybe a little bit more on the negative side, or maybe they're even like a loved one in spirit that's got like a bias or an agenda. They also cannot lie to you. So if you say, are you my spirit guide? I personally feel like they cannot answer that question. They cannot lie. They have to tell the truth. And so if you ask that question and you get like silence or like a non-answer, maybe not a spirit guide. You need to get like a resounding like yes or some sort of confirmation there. I think another indication that you're connecting to a spirit guide is kind of like when you are in a receptive, intuitive state. Because if you're in that state, that usually means you're just able to connect to your psychic ability more and therefore connect to psychic hits more. And so I think that, you know, on the opposite side, if you're hectic, if things are crazy and you're getting things coming in as psychic hits, those could be like your thoughts. They could be your anxieties talking. They could be intrusive thoughts. Again, maybe negative energies. Ultimately, though, like I feel like spirit guides usually come to you when you are receptive. That's not a hard and fast rule. I feel like sometimes my guides scream at me when like I'm totally not paying attention and in a hectic state. Ultimately, the more experience and the more practice you get just working with your guides, you're going to start to know, okay, this guide is, yes, a guide, or this is maybe not so much a guide. And you can even like visualize a spectrum in your mind and say, hey, where are you on this spectrum? Are you a spirit guide? Are you a negative energy? Like, place yourself on this spectrum and see kind of like where on that line visually they kind of like show you themselves. So how do you find your own guides? Ultimately, I would say developing your psychic ability is going to be, I don't want to say the easiest way, it's kind of like the long but most rewarding path, because ultimately, when you trust your own intuition, you're going to know better than anybody else, better than another psychic, if somebody is for you or not for you, as far as like a spirit guide. However, with any other skill, it takes practice. It takes time to learn how to communicate with spirits, spirit guides, angels, all of these things. And again, it's because you're learning the skill of your psychic ability. So understanding what your clairs are, which is how you receive psychic hits, understanding how to set your intention and making sure that you are talking to spirit guides, understanding different exercises you can do to purposely communicate with them. Like, go out of your way to learn automatic writing so that you can go chat with your guides, or do dream work so that you can chat with your guides. Side note, I do have a video on going to your psychic sanctuary, and in that meditation, you're basically also meeting one of your guides that's here to help you with your psychic ability. So you might want to run over there next and do that meditation. And basically your psychic sanctuary it's like your psychic place. It's like you go there whenever you want to do intuitive work, and it's also a place that you can meet your guides. Any new guides, any old guides, any guides that are here to help with a specific thing. So another way of finding out who your guides are is just by paying attention to the signs and asking for signs. You can say, hey, spirit guides, whoever you are, come introduce yourselves to me, and then pay attention. Take notes, write things down. You may not understand what it means fully yet, but again, as it happens more and more, you'll start to understand, oh, this is happening a lot, and this seems to be coming from this place, and this energy keeps popping up nonstop. So paying attention to signs and synchronicities, that's the way that I continue my relationship with my guides, but it's also how I pay attention to any new ones that want to come in and chat with me. And again, if there is one in particular that you would like to work with, just ask. You don't have to wait for someone's permission to go work with them. You can call out to them, you can visualize them, you can put something on your bedside table and say, hey, I want to work with you. Can you give me a sign that you're here and that you want to work back with me? You can also obviously go to another psychic or a medium or something and have them tell you what your spirit guide is. Again, always just take it with a grain of salt. I feel like I've had psychics tell me some of my guides, and it just did not resonate. So try all of these exercises out. Go out of your way to purposely practice your psychic ability. Do some exercises, do some meditations, automatic writing. There's so much. I have a whole playlist of exercises, and you're hopefully going to start to meet all of those guides. Besides trying to figure out who your own guides are, I do think it's helpful sometimes to ask it on behalf of others. I think that when you're reading for others, you kind of just trust the information that's coming through more versus doubting it or being worried about the outcome. So I think trying to figure out what other people's guides are and answer that question for others can be helpful, because then when you ask it for yourself, you kind of know, okay, this feels very similar to when I read for others. I think this must be the same. And to that end, we do have a Patreon group that meets once a month to practice reading each other. If you want to use that as an outlet to practice reading guides, maybe get information from other students on who your guides might be, that's a great place to go ahead and do that. We meet once a month. It's only $7. You can join us at any time, any experience level. And the last thing I really want to talk about with guides is really just understanding the importance of building a relationship and building the language in which you talk to your guides. And that only comes with time. When we talk about having a relationship with our guides, if you only talk to them every now and then, if you do it here and there, but then forget to connect with them, I think it's a lot harder to feel that connection with them. But if you make it a daily practice, or if that's too much even to start with, a weekly practice, and you just constantly are kind of tuning into them, I think that you're going to develop that relationship over time. again, I have my one guide that I've connected with for what, almost 8 years now, 9 years. And because of that, I have a really strong connection with this guide, and I trust a lot of things that come through. And that is going to just strengthen my connection with that guide. And so you have to think about it like you would any other relationship. If you want to have a relationship with somebody, you have to put the time and the effort into talking with them and to hang out with them. And it's kind of similar with guides. I think it's so important to acknowledge them, to thank them when they do give you information, to record things, to write things down as you receive them, to go back, to look at things, to validate anything that does come through with them, because you're saying, hey, I value your opinions, the information that you're giving, I would like more. And you don't always have to ask them for help. You can also just go to talk to them to talk to them. And I think that that's often sometimes where we start, is we only go when we need desperate answers answered or desperate questions answered, and we forget that we can just go say, hey, what do you have for me? Do you want to chat? Anything I should know right now? And just be totally open to hanging out and just using a meditation, maybe even to talk to your guides for 10 minutes. Ultimately though, it's totally okay if you go to them for asking help and making decisions. Don't feel like you can't do that. That is what they are there for. But I do think it's also just fun to go explore with them, to have fun with them, to learn something from them. I think sometimes I'll just go on a shamanic journey, and I will just say, hey guides, take me wherever you want. I'm an open book today. And sometimes there's one time I did that, and me and my guides were just playing and jumping through the clouds, and just I was just in pure ecstasy for that 20-minute journey. And there was nothing else that happened other than I was just playing with them. And it was so good, and maybe what I needed at the time. But sometimes keeping it more open-ended is a great way to connect with guides. Or just go in with a prompt, whether you're meditating, automatic writing, shamanic journeying, sitting down and just using your abilities and asking your guides questions. You can say hey, what do I need to know about the afterlife? What do I need to know about my life before I was here? And that's an easy way that you can connect with them and get psychic information at the same time. You can also just do something creative with them or heal with them. One really cool thing that I did was when my husband started getting into Dungeons and Dragons, you have to build a character, and it's totally an imaginary character. Some people will literally make little guys or draw them out. And I was not attached to any character in particular. I didn't think I'd play for that long. So I was why don't I just turn this into an intuitive exercise? And I said, guides, why don't you give me somebody that's a spirit guide of mine, and I will put her as my character. And I ended up being drawn to a certain type of what did they call them, races and classes in D&D. And I ended up drawing her as well, and even doing a mini of her. And it came out to be that she was actually one of my guides, which I've had for a while. And she's a dryad. I forgot to mention her earlier, and I should show her to you right over here. She popped up in this calendar that I bought, and I cut it out and put it on my wall over here with all my other guides so that I can see them often. So that's an example of connecting with them on a more creative level. You could also just have even less intention there and just be I want to draw. Can you guys help me draw something? And just kind of do automatic drawing or something, or do automatic creative writing and ask them to help you or to come through in some sense of the word. So it doesn't always have to be just asking for help. You can also wake up every day and say good morning to them. You can say good night to them. You could build them an altar. If the altar kind of freaks you out, you can just kind of make an area of your home where you dedicate the stuff to them, I guess. I've got again over here, I'll show a clip of it, just a couple of my guides, not all of them, and it's not really an altar. I want to build one eventually, but it's kind of a space where I am reminded of them. I also put it up in artwork, obviously, around my space, so that I'm reminded to connect with them. You can also buy physical things associated with them, whether it be crystals or pendants or artwork, to just kind of help you connect and remember to honor that connection with them. Ultimately, I would say try to start a daily practice, even if it's like tuning in for a moment and just saying, hey guides, what messages do you have for me today? And maybe do things a little differently as time goes on. But if you're constantly connecting to them, if you're constantly thinking about them, and constantly is not the right word, but like over time, if you're frequently thinking of them and reaching out to them when you do have questions, it's just going to be a relationship that is built over time. And I've talked a couple times about language, and language is really unique between you and your guides. And I don't mean like the actual language like English or Spanish or something like that. It's more like how do they communicate with you. And we all know we have the psychic clairs, right? And you might know that your guides communicate with you clairvoyantly, like you might see stuff or you might hear stuff. And that's not quite what I'm talking about. It's more like, what are their tendencies? Do they give you physical signs? Do they give you synchronistic signs? Do they talk to you mostly using your clairs? Do they talk to you in symbols, or do they talk to you very literal? Every guide is different and they have different tendencies. And like my guides often use like memories to communicate psychic messages. That language is unique to me. I feel like my guides probably are an equal split between talking symbolically to me and talking literally to me. Ultimately, when you know the language of your guides, you'll start to recognize them a bit more. The hits that will come through will be stronger because you're familiar with how to speak that language back and forth with them. And it'll ultimately be that a lot of those messages are clearer because you know, oh, this is how they talk to me. They always give me a card 5 times in a row, you know, when I know I'm not paying attention. And then it's like you have that funny moment where you're like, okay, that's definitely my guides. So again, that's going to look unique to everyone, but I do think the more you cultivate that relationship and understand that language, the stronger your psychic ability gets and the stronger of a reader you are, even if you're just reading for yourself. So let me know if you have any questions about spirit guides. I would love to answer your questions that you have. Feel free to like this video if it was helpful, and I hope that you jump on over to find your psychic sanctuary and meet your guide in that video. And yeah, let me know if you have any questions, and I will see you in the next one. Alrighty, bye!